From the heartland of America and the gateway to the West, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Norrie. Welcome to Coast AM. Later on tonight, Synchronicity. And I've got to do this. Happy birthday to my son, Jonathan, and his son, Simon. Can you believe it? They were born on the same month and the same day. Obviously not the same year. Both of them, just marvelous people. And little Simon has his father's demeanor. It's really, really cute. Happy birthday, you two. Love you. Here's what's happening. A swarm of more than 250 small earthquakes have struck near California's Mexico border, causing unease among residents and attention from scientists there. The strongest earthquake in the sequence was magnitude 3.9, striking directly underneath the town of Brawley. That's about 170 miles southeast of Los Angeles. 250 small earthquakes. I just hope this isn't the start of something big, as it's been predicted. A suicide bomber driving a pickup truck loaded with explosives struck a market in Baghdad in Iraq, killing at least 36 people in an attack claimed by the Islamic State, ISIS, hours after the French president, Francois Hollande, arrived in the Iraqi capital. It's out of control. And the lone American confirmed to have been injured in a New Year's terror strike on an Istanbul nightclub was saved by his cell phone. William Jacob Rock, 35 years old of Pennsylvania, was one of an estimated 600 people partying inside the nightclub early on New Year's Day when a gunman entered dressed as Santa Claus and opened fire. The attack, which was claimed by ISIS, killed at least 39 people, many of them foreigners, close to 70 others injured. Now, the man who called nearly every major economic trend over the past 30 years, including the 1991 recession, Japan's lost decade, the 2001 tech crash, the bull market and housing boom of the last decade, and most recently the credit and housing bubble issue, has caused now a startling new prediction. The Dow, he says, is going to crash to a degree we haven't seen since the Great Depression. This is from world-renowned economist Harry Dent. Harry will be my guest Thursday night on Coast to Coast. But I thought we'd bring in registered investment advisor Miss Shedlock. Michael, what do you think of this?
I don't think so. George, I'm not sure that he's called every trend. He was bullish in 2000 with the 2000 investor. That's when we had the dot-com crash. At the peak of the bubble, after the crash, he became very bearish, and we know what happened since then. I mean, I didn't get that one exactly right myself. And now just a couple weeks ago, he actually came out and reversed, and he's looking for the Dow to keep rising, although he does say it's going to, crash again after that rise. So we'll see. I think one of the main stories this year, George, is going to be robots, actually. And we're already seeing it. We've talked about it with manufacturing. We've talked about Amazon drones. Here's an interesting story that just came my way in Japan. An insurance company is replacing claims adjuster with an IBM Watson Explorer. Apparently these software robots here can actually do a better job at handling claims, looking at insurance adjustments, and deciding what the payout can be than real people. George, I'm wondering where this stops, because I just don't see a source of jobs here.
Mish, we will see what happens as this brand new year unfolds, and Happy New Year to you. Police and fire officials say a guest at a Washington hotel died after falling into a boiler shaft on the roof and plunging 10 floors to the basement. What the heck he was doing up on the roof is another question. Well, Tuesday, Earth will pass through a stream of dusty debris from a shattered comet. Let's check in with Dr. Sky, Stephen Cates, on what else is going on. Stephen, what do we got this week?
Well, Happy New Year, George, and to all the audience. January kicks off in full high speed here with great spirits. As you mentioned before, this is a time, folks, if you have clear skies, George, I'll recommend that the listeners look early into Tuesday morning into the northeast part of the sky. This is one of the weirdest meteor showers of all. It's called a quadrantid. It's almost hard enough to say.
That's why I let you do it.
Thank you. It's from an ancient constellation that was occupying that part of the sky called Quadrans Muralis. It was like a sextant or a celestial measuring device before we invented computers and smartphones. But here's the skinny on it. If you look into the sky just before dawn, now this is a prediction that astronomers have given us for years, and it's pretty good. This is one of the meteor showers that doesn't go over maybe 4 or 5 days. It actually peaks over a period of hours. So when's the best time to look? Just before dawn for the East Coast. The Pacific gets a better chance to see this, probably around 3 a.m. So just look up into the northeastern sky. How to know if you're looking in the right area? When you see the tail of the stars of the Big Dipper, easy to see, George, with the naked eye, that's the area of the radiant. And it's actually what we know as a extinct comet/asteroid known as 2003 EH1. And here's the rates. There could be, and I got to be very careful on this because every time we tell people about showers, they sometimes be little drippings instead of big showers. It could be up to 100 or so meteors per hour, but this shower peaks, as I mentioned, in a very short period of only a few hours. The live sky, George, to wrap it up, in the western sky after sunset, a small comet known as Comet 45P called Comet Honda, and the news media was kind of giving out some, I think, rather incorrect information. They were saying a bright comet will be seen on New Year's Eve. No, it's a faint comet visible in binoculars, something to take a look at. Both Mars, Venus, and Neptune all occupy the constellation of Aquarius. That is also high into the southwestern part of the sky. And George, probably the best thing of 2017 is still the great total American solar eclipse of August the 21st. I'm sure we'll be talking all about that. And as Dr. Sky reminds everyone, of course, always remember to keep your eyes to the skies, and Happy New Year, folks.
Oh, and Steve, don't talk about August already. It's going by way too fast already. Thanks.
Have a good morning.
Dr. Sky, Stephen Cates. Well, he wrote a book called 1 Second After, and just turned this planet upside down as we talked about the possibility of the power grid going down from a solar flare or an electromagnetic pulse attack from some rogue nation that detonates a atomic bomb in the atmosphere. Then he wrote 1 Year After, and now The Final Day. In a moment, William Forstchen back on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Now, for the next 2 hours, we're going to be talking with an issue that is so critically important to all of us. It is so important that I have devoted so much time here on Coast to Coast to try to get this solved, and I'm not going to stop. Dr. William Forstchen received his Ph.D. from Purdue University, specialized in military history and the history of technology. He has written a number of books and bestsellers, but he really caught our eye, of course, when he wrote 1 Second After, 1 Year After, and The Final Day, which comes out, as a matter of fact, in the morning. He was with me in Asheville, North Carolina, at the Diana Wortham Theater when we talked about this issue in front of a standing room only crowd. Welcome back to Coast, William Forstchen. William, it's always a pleasure. Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year, and also happy 14th anniversary.
Oh, thank you, William. Thank you. And let's hope this is a good year in terms of trying to get the power grid insulated. I want you to, first of all, for our new listeners, tell us what the issue is, and then I want you to give us an update on what's happening legislatively to maybe get this thing fixed.
George, you and I started talking about this 8 years ago when my first book on the subject, 1 Second After, came out. 1 Second After is about America being hit by an EMP attack, electromagnetic pulse. How it happens, an enemy tosses a nuclear weapon over the continental United States, detonates it, not on the ground like the old city busters of the Cold War, but detonates it about 250 miles above the continental United States. The gamma ray burst coming off of that bomb, a split second later, cascaded down to the Earth's surface, triggers an electrostatic discharge, which overloads the power grid. 1 second after, most likely all of the power grid of the United States blows offline. And here's the scary number that you and I have talked about before. People ask, well, so what? The electricity goes off for how long? Well, actually, it will be down for years. Congressional reports of 2004, 2008, which I based my novel on, congressional reports projected 90%, let me repeat that, 90% of all Americans would die within a year.
Tragic.
With the grid off.
Now, some have said that you'll need more than one atomic explosion across the country to shut down the entire grid.
The nightmare scenario is 3. One detonated over the eastern United States, one over the central United States, one over the western United States. They can be launched any number of ways. We just saw on the news, George, just a couple of days ago, North Korea claims they're now going to start lofting and testing intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
But you can also just take an upgraded Scud, park it on a container ship, park that in the Gulf of Mexico, pop them, and the game is over.
Exactly. And also, an X-flare from the sun can do the same thing, right?
Oh, George, I was just looking at a favorite site, spaceweather.com, and I urge your listeners to check into it occasionally. And we are at this moment staring at a major hole in the Earth's atmosphere, the sun's atmosphere. The sun on a regular basis blows off what are known as CMEs, coronal mass ejection. Does the same thing if it hits Earth head on, in what's sometimes referred to as a Carrington Event.
Which happened in the 1800s.
1859. A British solar astronomer was the first one to document it. It blew the Victorian internet apart.
And the telegraph system, which was our only electrical system at the time.
And the electrical overload was so intense that it was hitting the iron rails of the railroads of the 1850s and igniting the railroad ties.
Oh.
Which gives you an idea of how intense that was.
Now, we had one that was not quite as big as the Carrington event, but thank God it shot off the side of the sun and not at us directly, right?
George, remember a couple of years ago where you called me up and said, let's get on the air tonight because in the Earth's orbit, that twin CME that missed us by only about 2 or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
The Earth had been 2 or 3 days back in its orbit. You and I wouldn't be having this conversation tonight. We'd be sitting in still a major blackout a couple of years ago.
You know what our show would sound like if that had happened? Across the world, just like this. Nobody would hear anything, and it's remarkable. Now, what's happening in terms of any legislation? I've been talking to Peter Pry in the program, whom you recommended to us. What's happening in terms of getting some kind of legislation to get the power grid insulated against one of these episodes?
Favorite question. Why don't all of our listeners, your listeners, my friends, let's put aside Hillary, Trump. We're all Americans. We got a new administration coming in 2 weeks. And the current the administration coming in, part of the party platform was infrastructure upgrade. Now, Trump has 2 really good advisors on this. A friend of mine, Newt Gingrich, but also a brilliant gentleman, James Woolsey, who headed up the CIA under Clinton and worked with both sides of the aisle. They are all pushing for what's called the SHIELD Act. It languished in the Senate twice. Got through the House, bipartisan support. This is a bipartisan issue. Let's forget about our petty arguments.
Absolutely.
And it stalled in the Senate. Don't let it stall again. And so you have millions of listeners, George. If 1% of them called their members of Congress saying, as you guys are getting sworn in, we want infrastructure security taken care of, we can finally get that through and start preparing our system against not just an enemy attack, but also solar storms, which happen that every 50 to 75 years. They can be quite dangerous.
Should they use the verbiage, the SHIELD Act?
That is one good way of getting to it. There are several members of Congress who are already pushing the bill again, or just simply contact your member of Congress. Don't use a standard form. Just send them an email. I want infrastructure security against EMP and CME, similar to what was stalled twice with the SHIELD Act.
Why hasn't the Obama administration, during its 8 years, gotten anything done?
You want to go political, George?
No, I don't want to go political. I just want to lay it out there. Why haven't they done anything?
I was raging about 3 weeks before the election. The Obama administration put out an executive order ordering several divisions of government, including NASA, to start studying CME. And I was throwing my hands up. I remember you and I even chatted about it. It was like, wait a minute, NASA has the satellites up there. They've been observing this for years.
They already know.
Why do we need another bloody study? We need action. That was just nothing but political smoke and mirrors, which we've been living with for 8 years on this issue.
What we should have been doing is getting the best engineering heads together from power companies saying, we're going to pay for this as a government. You know what? That's where I want my taxes to go. And let's get this done.
George, let's talk about the cost. Would any of your listeners owning a $250,000 house go without insurance? First of all, you couldn't even get the mortgage.
You couldn't get the mortgage without it.
Right. Well, I'm calling, and you're calling. You are definitely a major voice. You're calling for an insurance policy on our infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Which would only cost, now, granted, only in the tens of billions. But relative to our GMP, relative to our federal budget, that's a fraction.
Well, now, here's the other thing that really is concerning to me, and at the same time, I don't understand it. Why haven't private corporations or those public corporations like Amazon and companies that live on the internet, why haven't they come forward with some kind of plan and donation to get this done? With the sales that they have, Alibaba in China, Amazon.com, they could finance this themselves.
George, you're asking the same question I'm asking. I really think it's like, we're not going to worry about it this quarter. We have created an economic system that doesn't do long-term planning. It's let's just get by the next month's report, the next quarter. It's going to take several years to harden the infrastructure sufficiently. That is too long ahead for way too many people. I pray that with the new president coming in who understands mega projects, that this is a mega project that we start now. In 2 or 3 years, we have a hardened grid, which will lessen the temptation of somebody like North Korea or Iran hitting us if they know the grid would survive the attack anyhow.
Absolutely, because our retaliation would be astronomical if they did something like that.
North Korea might not care because their ruling elite will be in bunkers thousands of feet deep. They would consider a first strike, but they would only consider it if they knew it would work. If it was problematic or low probability, they're not going to go near it.
And also, William, because you and I haven't talked too much about this, but I did talk with Ted Koppel about it, former Nightline host, of course, and Dan Rather as well. They're concerned about cyber attacks on the grid.
I highly recommend Ted Koppel's book, Lights Out, and very gracious gentleman who actually cited my work as well. We have numerous issues. We have cyber issues, which became evident to the American public this year with some political things. And, George, remember the Fresno incident?
Yep. Somebody took shots outside of it. Yep.
Well, why don't you run with that? Tell our listeners what that was about. That was a scary scenario.
And they never caught the people who shot from a distance. These were high-scoped rifles. They shot at the plant. And I think it was a test run to see if they could shut it down or what they could do.
What was amazing, I remember you and I were on the air only a week later talking about the Fresno incident, but it took mainstream media about a year to catch up.
I know. Sometimes, because of guests like you, we are so far ahead of the curve, so far ahead.
Also, another factor we have to look at is, I only came across this report in the last 3 or 4 months. Department of Energy. Not many people realize our electrical infrastructure, on average, the components in it are upwards of 40 years old. Can you imagine if our transportation system was still running on hay cars from the 70s?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Cuba. Cuba's still driving with cars from the 60s.
Yeah.
But gosh, I couldn't imagine doing that anymore today.
We are way behind the curve. We have to play catch up when it comes to infrastructure, but also our foreign policy to give a clear message to Iran, North Korea, and others. Don't even think about it.
We're going to come back in a moment with William Forstchen. We're going to talk about his new work called The Final Day. Listen to that title. What is that all about, huh? The Final Day. And his website, onesecondafter.com, is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. And then we'll take calls next hour with him about fighting to get our power grid insulated. I want you to send emails to your congressmen and to your senators. Just mention the SHIELD bill and say we got to get the grid insulated. We'll be back. And welcome back to Coast, where our special guest, William Forstchen. We're going to talk about his work, The Final Day. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. We'll take your calls next hour with William Forstchen about what I believe could be our most important issue facing all of us. Terrorism, of course, is high on the list, but this is big. William, the name of this new book, which comes out in hours, is called The Final Day. I love the title for a book, but it scares the heck out of me. Tell me about it. And it's a novel, by the way.
Yes, it concludes a trilogy. Publisher calls it the John Matheson trilogy. I tend to call it the EMP trilogy, which started with 1 second after, then a year and a half ago, 1 year after. And, yeah, I chose the title deliberately. This is a trilogy. I'm going to wrap it up. I feel that the message I wanted to get out there, besides writing a series of books I think people will find to at least be a fun read in part, I'm done with this topic. And you have been just incredible at helping me get the word out there for people to read the book, start thinking about preparing, start thinking about infrastructure, start becoming politically active.
Now, when you say you're done with the topic, that doesn't mean you're going to give up, right?
Oh, no.
All right.
Heck no.
Whoa, scared me for a moment.
No, this will always be my number one topic. I mean, I came into this 10 years ago. It wasn't on my radar. And then I happened to be in Washington, D.C. on the day the congressional report came out. And I urge your listeners, if you're doubting what George and I are talking about, just simply Google up Congressional Report EMP 2004 and again in 2008. A couple of days after that committee released its report, I met with Congressman Roscoe Bartlett, who pointed out to me, said, the problem is, Bill, there's no constituency. It's not in popular culture. When EMP is presented in popular culture, they always get it wrong. So I set out to write a realistic novel about what would happen in a typical small American town if the power went off and didn't come back on.
And I see the power go out for a couple of days. I had friends in Hawaii yesterday who a tree fell across a road and knocked out the power for 4 hours, and they went crazy.
People freak, yes. When I was in graduate school at Purdue, we got hit by what they call a once-in-a-500-year event ice storm. This is a university town. Power was down for most of the town for 11 days. People really did start to freak out.
Well, the one thing they said, and this is bizarre, but it's true, they said, I can't charge my phone.
Well, we remember all the footage from Sandy a day or two afterwards. There were lines 3 or 4 blocks long to get into McDonald's, to buy a crummy hamburger.
Yep, or you go to a pharmacy. I mean, everything is at that point. And I mentioned this story a couple of years ago, William, when you were on with me. A local drugstore had the power go out just at the drugstore. And they were going to try to count the change out to people by hand. They gave up after 2 customers. Shut the doors. They locked up.
When we talk about the 90% fatality rate, and people go, that doesn't seem possible. Well, let's just look at the economic collapse. Your ATMs don't work. Well, a lot of people aren't even using ATMs anymore. They just simply...
Your water doesn't work from your tap because you need electric power from the pumping plant to get it to you.
And you and 1,000 other people descend upon your local supermarket to grab the bottled water. How are you going to pay for it? Well, it just turns into a riot instead.
People start taking.
Yes.
They start taking. So let's go through a scenario, whether it's an X-flare or a nuke. Now, if there's a nuke, will there be retaliation? How do you retaliate if you don't know who launched it?
Well, I put that into the first book, 1 second after, where towards the end of the book, people find out who it was that attacked us. And one person in the novel is saying, gosh, there was payback. We turned those countries into glass, to which my main character says, does that change anything?
Yeah.
90% of us are dead anyhow.
Yeah. That's
Retaliation
way too long.
after the fact, yeah, might make you feel good, but does it change anything? No.
Okay, so whether it's a nuke or an X-flare, let's go through the scenario. This is day number 1. Do we know about the X-flare, first of all? Do we have time?
We would have between 24 to 72 hours warning because the CME travels slower than the speed of light.
It does not travel at the speed of light.
Right. So we have a visual from our NASA deployed satellites that would tell us there's a bad one coming.
And they don't know if it'll take the grid out. They just know it's a big one.
It's going to be a big one. And what it does is it impacts the magnetosphere, distorts it, finally punches through it, and then you have a very bad time of electrical overload. In contrast, an EMP, no warning. Pop, everything is offline.
Will we know if it's a nuke or an X-flare?
We would know in that if it's an X-flare, the information is instantly out there. Millions of citizens check in to spaceweather.com. From there, it gets distributed through the media. Government could not keep that one quiet.
Well, unless the power grid goes down, then you can't get to spaceweather.com.
Yeah, once it's down, well, at least you go, gosh, that was an X-flare. I really wish we had listened to George Norrie and prepared for this, but now we're really down in the deep hole.
When the nuke goes high atop the atmosphere, will we hear the explosion?
No, it's out in space. If you were looking in the direction of where it's popped, you would see the flash, but for 99% of the population, it would just suddenly be everything shuts off. Gee, where's the power trucks?
And you physically won't get killed by the explosion or the X-flare, correct?
No. And that confuses some people because they think nuclear weapons, they see the mushroom cloud. No, this is a detonation out in space, gamma ray burst. You don't see it. You don't.
No radiation fallout on us?
No. Fallout is a byproduct of a bomb bursting at the ground and throwing debris into the air.
Okay. All right. So it hits. How soon does the grid start going down?
Almost instantaneous. And one indicator would be airplanes will be falling from the sky.
Oh.
I just watched the movie Sully a couple of days ago. Sully.
What a hero.
Yeah, what an incredible guy. But he still had electrical power.
That's right.
So his joystick, which is connected to a computer, sends a signal to the rudder, to your elevators and ailerons to control the direction.
So you're saying the power in the plane from either an X-flare or a nuke will go too?
If X-flare, most likely all aircraft would be grounded, but in an EMP event, let's say it happens at noon, there's a minimum of 2,000 commercial aircraft, each with between 100 to 250 people on board.
Oh, my God. Hundreds of thousands of people will be in planes.
Which drove me nuts when the Obama administration, back early on, said, if there was an EMP, casualties might run into a couple of thousand.
Right. So, well, an EMP then, if we are insulated, if the grid's insulated, we can stop that, but the planes are still going to get knocked out. Anything
what they call, pilots call the glass cockpit, you're toast.
All right. So they start falling from the sky, crashing into cities, in the ocean, wherever they may be.
Mm-hmm.
The power grid starts going out. The people on the ground, they're in their offices, they're in their homes, they're in cars. What do they start seeing? They start seeing strange things, traffic lights go out, things like that?
Your traffic signals go out, cars all around you are stalling. Robin, my wife, and I were just driving through Atlanta this weekend, commenting, if but 10% of the cars stall, we're here for days. Even if your car might still be running. By the way, if you have an electric car or one of the hybrid cars, you're toast.
Yeah.
Everything just stalls. But here's the key thing, George. Most people will not know why.
I think I'm going to go out and buy a 1970 car with no computer in it.
How about a 1959 Edsel? I can sell you one.
Something like that. That's got to be worth some money by now.
Oh, it is.
Haven't you sold that yet?
No, I never had.
Oh, you were trying to sell a plane the last time I was with you.
Yeah, a 1946
Did you sell that?
Not yet.
All right.
But I did buy a biplane.
Anybody want a plane? Call Bill Forstchen. He's got one for sale.
And all the control surfaces are connected by wires, so that plane will continue to fly, even in the event of an EMP.
But people are seeing systems go down. And do the people on the ground and the radios start going down, right? The radio communications goes. What, do they realize there's something happening here?
The big giveaway for every citizen would be open up your cell phone. If the power goes off, but your cell phones are offline as well, that tells you something major has happened.
Okay.
Because even with Sandy, cell phones still work.
They still work. That's right. So cell phones will be affected too immediately, won't they? Those towers will get fried.
Even if your personal cell phone is not cooked, the towers are cooked.
Oh. Okay, so the systems start collapsing. You can't get running water. You don't have electricity in your house. People are up in buildings. Maybe they're on high floors. The elevators aren't working. There's pandemonium here all over the place. Even the structure for the police, their radios won't work. How do they even get assignments? Go here, go there.
Or their segways aren't going to work. Maybe their bicycles will work, but their patrol cars will not. That is why I am such an advocate of prepping. If things go bad, you don't want to have to go out into the street to get water.
Right. But the problem, William, is you can prep for a few months.
Right.
You know, and we've got companies that will give you that prep. But what do you do for a year or two?
You pray, or you prep even more.
Then it's Mad Max.
Yes, it is. That's why 90% of the population will be dead at the end of the year.
And all this for a few $1 billion can be prevented.
Exactly why you're upset about it and I'm upset about it, why you broadcast about it, why I write books about it. Wake up, America.
I got to tell you, I hate insurance policies. But you know what? When you need it, when you have to cash it in, it's good to know you've got one.
You got it.
And that's exactly what this is. Sure, we have to make a big investment, and it's a lot of money in terms of actual cash out, as you said, several $1 billion. But the point is, look at what happens if something occurs, and we can say to everyone, we protected this. We protected you. Your way of life hasn't changed at all.
And, George, if we prep beforehand, it lowers the probability that an enemy would strike us, also raises the probability that we could survive either an EMP or a CME.
What would somebody like Putin say if he saw us insulating our grid? Would he think, they're going to attack us, they're getting ready?
I think Putin is enough of a nationalist that if he saw us hardening our grid,
he'd do the same thing.
He would do the same darn thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, too. And by that time,
man.
Trump would just pick up the phone and said, Vlad, we got to get this fixed.
Yes.
And you know what? I'm not too concerned about China or Russia doing this. I'm concerned about some rogue nation like North Korea or some other nation that ends up with nukes to do something stupid.
Excellent analysis. China and Russia have too much to lose. They're dependent on infrastructure as well. Iran, run by religious fanatic crazies. North Korea, just a plain old psycho who needs a good haircut. They're the ones I really worry about.
Has this been tested on anything? Have they recreated this in a laboratory?
Absolutely, yes. I reference to your listeners, look up Starfish Prime. You can find it on Wikipedia. We launched a nuke into space in 1962, blew it, took out a fair part of the Hawaiian power grid. Soviet test 184. They did the same thing over Kazakhstan, blew out a good part of their grid. So it's there. There's the proof there. It's real.
William Forstchen, our guest, his book, The Final Day, is coming out on Tuesday. So it's coming out on this day, and it's available at Amazon.com and bookstores as well. It is the final trilogy of his series of The Final Day. Then he wrote 1 year after, and then the first one was 1 second after. And you're the one, if they can get this fixed, you and Michael Maloof, I think, are heroes.
I would add in guys like Roscoe Bartlett, Dr. Pry, James Woolsey, advisor to the president. This is one of his 3 top priority issues. Newt Gingrich as well.
And all they have to do is vote on it and fix it.
Yes.
How long would it take to start fixing? To put the engineering together, to fix it? That's all?
When we had that, remember that shovel-ready deal for $1 trillion 8 years ago?
Yeah.
I thought, hallelujah, they're going to do something. Well, they didn't. demand it this time. It can start being done within months. But here's another point that Trump has hit on. Only 15% of the manufacturing of electrical infrastructure parts takes place in America. We are totally dependent on overseas.
Oh, I know. China's the one that has all the transformers now, right?
That would be like on December 1st, 1941. It's like, we're going to be at war with Japan pretty soon, and somebody says, all our airplanes are made in Japan. Do you think we have a problem?
Yeah. And the transformers, I'm talking about the big ones now.
The big ones.
We don't have enough of them here right now to take care of the problem.
In the same way that FedEx delivers to your pharmacy every day, just enough to keep the medication supply going.
Because they know they're going to get there tomorrow and the next day and the day after, but this isn't going to be the case here.
The same thing with our big transformers, even our medium-sized ones. It's a just-in-time delivery. There is no stockpiling of spare parts.
We would become, overnight, a third world nation.
We would become extinct.
What a sad way to go, Bill.
Yes. Let's make sure it doesn't happen in 2017.
What are the chances of us really getting this fixed?
I believe this is the year to get it fixed. If we don't start on it this year, George, let's find a bunker someplace, because if we don't start working on it this year, we never will. The opportunity is now. The moment is now, not 6 months or a year from now. It's now.
Now, here's my conspiratorial question. Are there some high-level Illuminati types that would love to see this happen? They'll be hunkered down. They'll be okay. But what about for the rest of us?
George, don't be a spoiler for the third book.
Whoops.
Whoops.
Don't send me excerpts then. Oh, boy. Yeah?
You and I talked about this.
What a way to reduce the world's population.
You and I talked about this in Asheville, because I was asked this question at a conference a couple of years ago, and a young lady there said, one of my closest friends is the daughter of a senator, and her response is, the elite will take care of their own.
Because here's the amazing thing about this way, as we all know. The buildings will not be damaged.
No.
The buildings will stay intact. We'll be dead because of the chaos, but all they have to do is clean up the carcasses and bury us somewhere and start all over again, fix the grid, and they'll have a worldwide population of a few million, which is exactly what they want anyway.
Remember that sick so-and-so about 6 months back that says that, we should all stop reproducing because we need to drop the population of the world to 500 million?
Yep, that's been that number.
Yes. For some, that's the magic number, and they'd love to see it, as long as they're one of the survivors.
Well, with William Forstchen, we're going to open up the phone lines next hour. We've got a complete hour with William before I talk about synchronicity later on in the show tonight. So do make that phone call. It may be the most important call you've made. And again, William, I want you to address to folks what they can do with their senators and congresspeople.
Get in touch now. Congress comes back into session this week. Write to your congressman, your senator, say you want a SHIELD Act to harden our infrastructure. You want a foreign policy that sends a clear message to North Korea, Iran, don't even think about it, because we must preemptively prevent it. Most important move at the moment, let's harden our infrastructure. It can be done. It can be done this year.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, and the book, of course, is coming out Tuesday, which is this morning now, and it's available all over the place. And I noticed also Amazon will give you all three for an amazing discount.
Yeah. Hurry, buy today.
Just so you got to read them in order, though, folks. 1 second after, 1 year after, and then the final day. Don't read the final day first unless you've already read the other two.
Well, I know you have hundreds of thousands of listeners who read 1 second after and 1 year after. So this wraps up the story, folks.
Okay, we're going to come back in a moment. Make the call to us. William Forstchen is our guest. You can paint out your own scenario, ask him a question. We will take your calls when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. I spent 9 years with the United States Navy because I love this country and I really want to protect it. And so we need your help, too, to get this grid protected. Fire away at your congresspeople and your senators. I'll have Bill Forstchen again when we come back. give you a little bit more information on just how and what you should do. And we'll come back with your calls in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to your calls this final hour with our special guest, William Forstchen, talking about his new book, The Final Day. This is the trilogy series, and it's his last one dealing with this subject matter of protecting, of course, the grid, the power grid from an X-flare, or as he specifically has attacked in this book, the EMP attack from a rogue government that detonates a nuke in the atmosphere, and that starts shutting things down. John Matherson, though, is your hero in the book, isn't he?
Yes, he is.
Who is he? Is he you? or is he me?
You do, George.
Thank you, William.
I've been asked that a lot because my main character is a history professor at Montreal College, which is me. But no, Matherson, I based him in part on a very dear friend, a colonel from World War II, hero on Omaha Beach, who actually helped with his autobiography called Honor Untarnished, General Don Bennett. Very soft-spoken, gentle man with a real ramrod of steel in his back. I based him on several other people, and most of the characters in the novel, it's set in a real town. Black Mountain, North Carolina, Montreat. A lot of characters are based on friends of mine.
Let's hope this never happens, huh?
That's what you and I have been praying ever since we both got involved in this. But I really feel the clock is ticking. Sooner or later, we're going to be hit either by a coronal mass ejection or an EMP.
See, with the coronal mass ejection, we have no idea when it's going to happen. It could happen tomorrow. Right. I mean, these are just so unexpected. With the nukes, yeah, it could happen tomorrow too, but it's more likely to be predictable, I think, which gives us a little time to get this grid going. Now, here's my question, too. If we start protecting the grid and insulating the grid and doing the engineering that we need to do to protect the grid, is somebody going to detonate a nuke because they want to, get us before we fix the power grid?
I don't think so, because look back to the Reagan buildup in the early 80s. We were way behind the curve vis-a-vis the Soviets when Reagan came in. He made it very clear. He was going for a full-bore buildup. And he bought time. He actually got the system up to parity. And finally, it sent the Soviets into the ground. To follow the logic of we better not do anything because it might provoke somebody is a certain path to disaster. Look what happened to Europe in 1939. Oh, we better not rearm too much because it might get the Nazis angry with us. Look at the result. It was a bitter 6-year war.
North Korea made a video, animated video, of what a nuke would do to the United States from a launch from them. Don't you see that as an act of war?
George, well, we've also seen the same thing with Iran, where they have that very annoying chanting going on, and both North Korea and Iran have specifically said, we will EMP you. Analogy, you go home from work tonight, I get up tomorrow morning, I hear gunshots, I peek over the fence, I see my neighbor is shooting at a target of me and my family, screaming obscenities. Do I take that seriously?
Yeah, saying, I can't wait to kill you, Forstchen.
Right. Oh, I'm going to go back and hide in my house and go, maybe if I don't say anything, he won't be mad at me.
Yeah, he'll like me or something.
Yeah.
So you agree, it's an act of war?
It is an act of war.
And yet,
we're coming up on an interesting moment because North Korea has specifically said they have an ICBM. They're going to test it within the next couple of weeks.
I don't see Vladimir Putin or the leaders of China coming up with videos depicting what it would look like if they nuked the United States. I don't see them doing that.
Because they are as vulnerable as we are. Their infrastructure is just as complex. The more complex the infrastructure, the more fragile it becomes.
Either we look at this guy in North Korea as a joke, or we're really stupid. I don't know which it is.
Robin, my wife, and I were watching a video a couple weeks back of one of these mega parades, and it was just like, it would be so easy to take care of that guy in that big plaza. We should send a message.
What do you think a guy like Donald Trump will do? Because I don't know if he saw this video or not, but if one of his aides say, Donald, even Newt Gingrich, maybe Gingrich will show it to him. You got to see this. I wonder what he'd do. Would he pick up the phone and try to talk to Kim and say, Kim, what are you doing? Or would he do something?
I recall when North Korea did its first major missile launch, it was actually within weeks after my 1 second after came out. Newt Gingrich was speaking up loud and clear then. He said, we should convey to them, the moment that rocket enters international waters, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. We can intercept. We have Aegis cruisers that could do this. We've been too afraid of our own shadow for 8 years.
And I'm convinced we have things in space that could fix this.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
We have allowed both North Korea and Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. And please, anybody who's telling me Iran is not on the edge of it or already has it, they have their head in the sand. North Korea definitely has them. We could have prevented that. We didn't have the guts to do it. We might pay a terrible price.
All I know is if somebody did a video showing how they're going to kill you and destroy you, you need to do something about it.
Absolutely,
you cannot pretend that it didn't happen.
If I'm getting emails from somebody or somebody knocks on my door and says, I'm going to come by tomorrow and kill you, I'm going to take that.
You got to take action.
Yes.
Simple as that.
Yes.
Let's go to the phones. Mark, truck driving in Sacramento, California. Mark, you're on with us. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, thank you for taking my call, George.
Sure
and Happy
thing.
New Year to you and William.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
My question is, I've listened to lots of conversations about this, but nobody has really ever talked about your home solar systems, what it's going to do to that.
Great question. Should I run with it, George?
Yeah, well, the home solar system probably won't get cooked or baked if it's internal. Do you think, William?
There are folks who claim that they are now producing solar panels that will be resistant against a major EMP. I do have some solar panels. I keep them folded up. I keep them in a secured, EMP-proof location.
But it's not going to do anything for you. So, I mean, number one, let's assume you have a solar panel and you've got electricity in your house. You don't have running water because the power pumps are done. You can't, your furnace isn't going to work because the gas company can't provide gas to your house. Mm-hmm. If you're self-contained with electric heat, that is the only thing that'll probably work. Your stove will work, but you may not have any food to put out there. So what good are having solar panels when all the other systems around you aren't working to provide you anything?
Well, I have a solid-state backup generator that can be charged up with a solar panel. Granted, it's a tad high-end, but I've built in some redundancies into my home. But let's say you have listeners who are living in apartments in major cities.
Yes, we do.
And I urge all of you, get a couple cases of bottled water, or just start hanging on to your 2-liter bottles, fill them up with water. Get 30 or 40 gallons of drinking water set aside.
I mean, your electrical lights aren't going to work because don't you need I don't know, would your lights work with a generator? I guess they would, huh?
Well, I have these nifty little solar-powered flashlights that you can just hang from the ceiling, and they provide wonderful lighting. There are very simple answers. A key thing, George, is if it all goes down, you don't want to be out on the street, at least for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, and then what's going to happen, William, when the neighborhood finds out you've got a little power?
You have to start thinking about security issues, but I urge anybody who's thinking about that, about weapons and such, for heaven's sake, get professional training now, no matter how good you are.
Oh, the state of Missouri. Look, I am a concealed weapons licensed carrier, okay? Mm-hmm. The state of Missouri has just implemented no license. As long as you're not a convicted felon, mm-hmm. you can go out, you can get your handgun legally, but you can carry concealed without a training license. I'm not for that at all.
I am not either. Mm-hmm. There was that tragedy of the columnist. I believe he was down on the West Coast. He handed his weapon to a teenage boy to show it to him.
And it went off.
Yeah. More people get killed by unloaded guns than loaded guns at times. Get training, get training, get training. No matter how good you think you are. you need training.
We're going to Dumont, New Jersey now. Greg's with us on Coast to Coast. That's east of the Rockies, obviously. Hey, Greg, go ahead.
Great show as usual, George.
Thank you,
Two
Greg.
questions. Well, first of all, the food supply is gone in a week. I live, a block from the supermarket. That's not going to do my family any good. What about the 100 or so nuclear power plants whose electricity?
Oh, God, you brought up something.
Coolants, right?
That is
we have
different.
100 Fukushimas on our hands. How about around the world? The question to your guest before I take the answer off the air: is Switzerland prepared for this, being that they're so far ahead of us in protecting their population in general, or Austria?
All right, let's talk about Switzerland first or Austria. Are they ready for an X-flare or EMP?
I can't address those. I'm not sure.
I don't think they are.
I do know that Israel is hardened key strategic situations, but in general, I can't speak for. I would assume Switzerland has always been the forward edge in terms of protecting itself. I'm going to guess that they have hardened their system better than the rest of Europe.
Nuclear power plants?
Oh, good heavens.
Oh, the meltdown. The generators will last not that long.
The big issues we've talked about before is the fuel storage. The use, so much fuel is stored on plant, particularly used fuel rods. You take out the coolant systems, they have oil fired that can sustain it for a couple of weeks. Then you got major, major problems as well. I would not want to be downwind.
Next up, we go to Harry in Port Huron, Michigan. Hi, Harry. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, George. This call might be the most important you're going to take tonight. I'm one of the people out here that got Trump elected big time. I've sent out 500 to 1,000 press releases all over the country, and this is even better than that, and people agree on this. I told Tom, Bill, that we can get this done by Friday. We don't have to wait. We can get this done. We can shut down Washington. I know how to shut down the Capitol, and they'll take so many phone calls there. I've seen it happen where their lines are just frying because they can't. There's so many calls coming in. And we can force them to do this stuff, guys. We can force them to do this. I've done it. I know how to do it. And so, Bill, if you want me to do it, get my number off air, or I'll get yours, and we can get this done starting tomorrow. I can write a press release. I've done them.
Go to William's website if you can, Harry. Send him a personal email through his website, and he'll get back to you.
Mobilize people to contact their members of Congress and say, we want a SHIELD Act, infrastructure security, and a robust foreign policy to stop the threat of an EMP hit.
Yeah, what we got to do is start doing smart things for this country.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I mean, you go out to dinner and you see couples not even talking to themselves, William. They're on their phones.
Yes.
We have become so technologically dependent on internet and things that are electrical and technology that if you take that away today, people are lost. I mean, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to, your microwaves don't work, your stoves won't work, your ATMs won't work, your television won't work, your radio won't work, your smartphones won't work. It's over.
George, I've been teaching college for almost a quarter of a century, and when the whole thing with laptops came in, I thought, this is going to be great. Well, it's now 20 years later. I forbid my kids from turning on anything in the classroom. You bring an old-fashioned pencil and a pad of paper because they go nuts without it. In fact, they almost do have nervous breakdowns after 1 hour. The moment class is over, boom, 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 all their systems are back on. And I've said to them, suppose you couldn't turn it back on. What are you going to do? You might actually talk to a person face-to-face for a change.
I get emails from, if I have a guest on who doesn't like Trump, and boy, I had one last night.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't shut the guy up.
Mm-hmm.
I get lambasted for stuff like that. And then if I have somebody on who doesn't like Hillary, I get lambasted for that. So I can't win. And I don't favor either one. I didn't during the election, and people who really listen to this show know that. I try to balance myself as much as I can, calling it the way I see it. But, man, there are a lot of people out there that they love their candidate, and the candidate can't do anything wrong. And if you say one thing about them, even critical, they come after you like crazy. Be that as it may, if Donald Trump can get the grid insulated, he goes way up, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of being a very astute president.
George, to go into my fictional world of 1 second after, John Matheson, politically conservative, the woman that becomes a major part of his life, Michaela, she's progressive. There's a heartbreaking conversation about a month into the story where they look at each other, they go, you know, all the things we used to argue about are trivial now. What you and I are talking about tonight is bipartisan. I don't care how left you are or how right you are. We all have kids. We all love our country, even though we might accuse the others of not doing so at times. We got to work together.
Part of me would hope that an X-flare would hit a portion of the grid, take out a couple big cities for a little bit, not a long time, just enough for people to see what could happen when it goes down forever.
Amen.
That's what we need. Cornelius in Alexandria, Louisiana. Hi, Cornelius. Go ahead.
Hey, George and William, how y'all are there?
Okay.
Look, like I tell him, William, I'm the God, guns, and gold man, the Bible, bullets, and beans man, and you better get ready. But I enjoy you, Mr. Forstchen. I watch you on the Jim Baker show, and I hope you'll get on Glenn Beck, too, just like you're doing with George. But I was telling Tommy tonight, George, now, let's say we get all this stuff hardened and everything, and then we get hacked. So if we get hacked, will that take down the grid and everything?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Getting hacked is also a very strong possibility, and I'm not sure we're doing much about that either, William.
Look at all the hacking incidents politically related. There was also reports a couple of days ago about malware in the New Jersey electrical system. Let's run down the list. CME, coronal mass ejection, EMP, terrorist strike just using a high-power rifle on transformers, and then cyber malware attacks.
Or takeover of our nuke power plants physically.
Yes. Any of those, catastrophic. We need a defense system for that. It's that simple.
We have to.
All that. It's a no-brainer.
The game has changed. My dad was in World War II, and I've been going through some old pictures of him, and I'm looking at these guys standing by tanks and things like that, and I'm going, that's a necessary part of being in a strong military. But nowadays, you don't need all that to cause the same kind of mayhem and destruction. You can sit at a computer and shut down a power grid and create more havoc than you could with an army of people in tanks. We're going to come back in a moment with final calls with William Forstchen on Coast to Coast AM. Well, we're going to come back in a moment and take final calls with William Forstchen as we talk about his new work, The Final Day. Next hour, of course, Dr. Kirby Surprise joins. Yep, that's his name. Dr. Kirby Surprise, talking about how synchronicity works. And welcome back to Coast, final segment with William Forstchen. And William, thank you so much for everything you're doing for our country. And I hope one day you're up there on the dais and they're congratulating and thanking you for insulating the grid when this bill gets signed, sealed, and delivered, and they insulate the grid. I hope there's some award for you.
George, if that ever happens, you're going to be right alongside me because you've gotten the word out to millions of people.
Well, I'll take a step behind you, though.
No. Absolutely not. Thank God for the way you've been putting this message out.
I remember I got an Emmy Award for scenic design years ago, and I've been blessed to have 3 television Emmy Awards. But on one, I had a couple of folks with me that helped me design a news set, which was very innovative before people were doing weather centers and stuff like that. And I had this as a very high-tech set, and so the 3 of us were all awarded Emmy Awards in St. Louis. And it was kind of funny because we're all sitting together, and one of the 3, as they announced the winners of the Scenic Design Emmy Award, we all stand up, the 3 of us, to shake each other's hands before we walk up to the stage to get the Emmy Awards, right? In a packed theater. And so the 2 of us, of the 3, we get up to shake each other's hands. We look for the 3rd guy, He's nowhere to be found. And we're going, where did he go? He's already up on stage holding up his Emmy.
Yep.
Just thought I'd remind you, just in case you're up on stage with me.
Nope. We'll do it together.
All right, let's go to the phones. First-time caller, David in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, David, welcome to the show. Go ahead.
Thanks, and I'd like to wish you guys a happy New Year and a happy 14th
Thank you, David.
anniversary.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. The question I have is, in case we don't insulate the solar grid in time, is there any way that we can insulate vehicles or any parts, critical parts of vehicles? So in the event that you have an X-flare or an EMP, that after this happens, you can somehow prevent your car from your vehicle from being affected at all.
Good question. I don't know if there's much you can do with the electronics of a car today, William.
Great question. The further back you go, if you can pick up an old vehicle from the 70s or 80s, you're a heck of a lot safer.
Yeah.
If you got a Leaf or some of the current hybrids, I'm sorry. But far better than me in 30 seconds on air, there's actually a lot of good startup companies now actually do have websites about how to protect your car, what spare parts to have, how to secure them. Check some of those out.
Will power lines get cooked?
Yes.
With either one, with the EMP or solar flare?
Particularly your high tension lines, those big, massive pylons and such. I remember seeing a video at a conference. The wires were literally exploding off the line.
Oh my God. So even if they got replacement transformers, most of the wires that feed you the power will be cooked.
And think about the logistics of just restringing the wires. The power trucks that you need, the vehicles, the spools, where does it come from, where is it stockpiled? There are the repair bottlenecks that turn into a nightmare.
Technically, what's required to insulate the grid against this?
The shorter the wire between some relatively high-tech circuit breaking systems, the better off you are. Shorter wire, less absorption of overload.
Do you have to insulate the power lines, as we just mentioned?
Actually, the best thing is very short. Almost on every pylon, you have a circuit breaker built in. It's not the standard circuit breaker that we have in our homes, but they do have circuit breakers that can handle that rapid spike. In the event of a CME, what we have to do is turn all the power off and then let the system absorb what the overload is.
Let it hit and then turn it back on again?
Turn it back on about a week later. It will resonate for quite a few days afterwards.
Okay. But in terms of insulating, would you need to insulate every power line?
My appeal is what I call lifelines of rebuilding. Start with major trunk lines.
All right. Okay.
And then you can rebuild the web from there, and then you just keep adding on and adding on.
All right. So it's not as if everything's protected.
No.
Even if we insulate the grid, what you're saying, and if I understand that, certain areas will be protected, certain lifeline portions of the grid will be protected, but we're still going to have some work.
I take, for an example, Charlotte to Asheville, North Carolina. If we run, if just one or two of the power lines stay up, and then you have a power distribution system in Asheville for emergency supplies, then you can rebuild from there versus everything is blanked out.
Keith is in Connecticut. Welcome to the program, Keith. Thank you for calling.
Hi, gentlemen. I've been listening to you talk with your guests on the radio for a long time, and it's gotten me thinking. I'm convinced the way to combat this thing is through analog systems, is through like steam generation. The first thing that's going to go wrong in a situation that you have described is your water. You're going to have a problem with water, and you're going to have a problem with your sewage treatment.
Yes, exactly.
Everybody should have a backup steam motor, so at least you could keep pumping water and processing sewage. And at these nuke plants, every nuke plant should have a steam generation so they could suck water out of the river or water body near them to cool these reactors.
And you know, William, we haven't talked
good
about.
Idea?
It's a great idea, Keith. We haven't talked about the disgusting portion of sewage, but I mean, without water, that's going to be a major, major sanitary issue.
There's any number of possibilities, and the gentleman raises a good one. Retroing for steam on some systems, external combustion engine. But George, you're hitting the key thing. You know, what goes in must come out. And all that stuff that we're flushing away every day goes through processing plants powered by electricity. What happens is all the water supplies start becoming polluted. Or as we used to say when I was growing up in Newark, New Jersey, flush twice, it's a long way to Bayonne. Everything starts becoming polluted, and then gastrointestinal, which just makes it worse.
Oh,
5 to 7 days in, you're going to have a lot of sick people.
what a mess. What a mess indeed. And there's nobody to help. FEMA can't handle this.
Well, remember all those people on the roofs in New Orleans?
During Katrina?
Yeah, FEMA saved me.
They can't.
No.
They can't. Kevin in North Dakota, thanks for calling, Kev. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, Kevin. Thank you.
See, I have a bit of a problem with the protecting the power grid. Is that if it still works, planes will still fall out of the sky. Transportation communications will still go down. Cars, trucks, radios, TVs, computers, that sort of thing. How is that going to help that?
You're dead on right, sir. There will be a hell of a lot of casualties on the very first day.
Will satellites get knocked out too?
Satellites have to be mega hardened because, particularly those in high orbit, because of the variables of solar radiation. I doubt from a low altitude EMP burst that satellites, maybe those nearby might be impacted. But let me I got to segue back to one other thing.
All right.
Every person, just go to your sporting goods store or go online. You can buy a basic water purifying bottle for about 15 or 20 bucks. You can pour raw sewage in and you get drinkable water out. That will be a lifesaver. It's a $20, $25 investment at most.
Well worth it.
Yeah.
Let's go to Camille in Sacramento. Welcome to the show. Hi, Camille.
Hi, yes, I'm a first-time caller, and thank you for taking my call, and Happy New Year to you both.
You too.
My question is in regards to, like, what we can do now. I mean, I know, you were saying, contact your congressmen, your senators, savings and being prepared, but it's like, what if you have issues or problems now?
Excellent question, ma'am. Let's go down a quick checklist. Political action. Definitely take care of it. Personal preparedness, as I just mentioned. Get a basic water purifier in your house. Just a bottle, like a sports bottle.
Get some storable food.
Get some storable food. And, George, you were just advertising what I think was one heck of a great deal. 72-hour supply for $10.
Yep.
Or next time you're in the market, just pick up some good old-fashioned canned food. Set aside.
And make sure you have a hand can opener.
Yes. There's nothing worse than staring at the can and you don't have a can
That's right.
opener.
And your electric opener doesn't work.
If you are on medication, do not let that bottle get down to only 2 or 3 pills left. Keep yourself topped off. Talk to your doctor about legally expanding your supply.
God, that's another problem. Another one right there. Your pharmacies will be jammed or closed. How do people get their prescriptions, life-saving prescriptions in some cases?
Pain control medications for people on cancer, asthma medication, diabetes, any number of situations. If not you personally, somebody in your family needs that medication. Personal security. Again, if you're going to think about a firearm, for heaven's sake, get training. But even something like pepper spray or a taser, be able to protect yourself in your home. Think about the basics. Build on it.
And as old Frank Sinatra would do, he'd go get a pint of Jack Daniels and just take it easy.
Also, Robin and I picked up a number of those little 1-ounce bottles like you get on airplanes. They're great trade items. Be able to trade with somebody.
Somebody wants to just get drunk. They're so depressed.
Well, I'll trade you this for a can of food.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to Kevin in Colorado now. Welcome to the show. Hi, Kev. Go ahead.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call. I'm
Sure
an
thing.
EMT here in Colorado. My partner and I would like to thank you. You get us through some long, boring night shifts.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for what you do, Kev.
Thank you, sir. So I had a question involving vehicles that you guys already answered. So I'm going to swing my question towards maybe towards insulin. So if someone has insulin that needs to be refrigerated, if you have a refrigerator that's unplugged, is that going to last through the EMP attack?
Oh, gosh.
No, it won't. Your refrigerator, unplugged or without electricity, will keep that cool for maybe 24 hours, and then it starts to go, Bill.
For several $100s from a number of different sources, if you have an insulin issue, pick up a solid-state electrical generator that can be powered off of a small solar cell. Pick up one of those small 12-volt camper refrigerators.
The little tiny ones.
That's all you need to put the insulin in and keep it temperature stable, or any other medication that requires temperature.
Now, how long would one of those generators last? And they run on what? Propane, gasoline?
No. I say don't go with propane or gas because you're going to run out.
You are going to run out.
I actually have one that runs off a solar panel. It charges it up, and it will run a DC 12-volt DC camper refrigerator for a heck of a long time.
Yeah, that's something else. You got to think about your medicines.
That's the key thing for refrigeration is your medication. And remember, all your food that's in the freezer and all that, you better eat it up quick because it's not going to be stable after 4 or 5 days.
If you look at prophecy for a moment, what are the odds of something like this from one of these two scenarios, or maybe three if we include a hack attack on the cyber grid, of really happening? What are the odds, in your opinion?
100%.
You think it's going to happen?
H.G. Wells, back around 1912, 1914, wrote a scenario that involved nuclear weapons. Jules Verne's, others writing about air warfare back in the 19th century. If a weapon system has been developed, inevitably it is going to be used, no matter how horrific. We've used nuclear weapons twice. We realize now there's a more effective use of a nuclear weapon than EMP. Sooner or later, I pray not in our lifetime, somebody's going to do it.
Or our kids' lifetime. I mean, who wants them to go through it? Or our grandchildren? You know, I got my son, his little boy turned 7 yesterday on the 2nd. It's the same as his birthday, by the way. And, you know, you want a future for them. You don't want them to have to go through this.
Therefore, be prepared. Now, when we observed Pearl Harbor several weeks back, people remember, we had a radar system. The radar system detected the Japanese planes coming in. The guy operating the system called into headquarters, said, I got something big on the screen. What was he told? Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Think of what that 1 hour warning would have given.
Oh, could have saved thousands of lives.
Oklahoma.
Don in Roy, Utah. Let's get you in here, Don. Go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. I appreciate the topic tonight.
Thank you, Don.
I'm calling about storage on water and storage on gasoline. I've got
a
generator that's large enough to power my house, but it's going to take gas to run it.
Yes, sir.
And I've got plastic 55-gallon drums, and I've got to store them outside. I can't put them in the house, and we get cold weather up here, and that water freezes. So I know that they have some chemicals you can put in it to keep it pure. But how do you keep it from freezing? You can't, can you?
No, well, it depends on what you insulate it in. But here's another problem. If you need gasoline for a generator, the gas pumps aren't going to be working when this happens. So you're going to have to store some. But how much gasoline can one store, William?
Well, you could go into the thousands of gallons, which is highly impractical. That's the problem with gas or propane-fired generators. Sooner or later, you will run out of fuel in a long-term scenario. So ration it out very, very carefully. Power up just for an hour a day.
And in terms of keeping your water from being frozen in canisters or bottles, what do? Wrap it up in a blanket?
If you're storing it outside, you're just going to have to live with it because anything you put into it, antifreeze, you're going to kill yourself.
I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I'm in St. Louis, came here for the holidays, going back to L.A. in a couple of weeks, It hit 0 degrees out here. I mean,
you got to think about
that's cold.
You got to think about keeping yourself warm in the winter. Or I can recall doing a show out of Phoenix where they were rather dismissive until I pointed out it's 110 degrees out there today. How are you going to stay cool and stay alive?
Well, here's the other problem.
Yeah.
Depending on when this occurs,
Yes.
if it occurs in the dead of winter and your heaters and furnaces don't work, it's not even worth staying in your house. Your house is going to get down to freezing. You can't survive in that.
George, precisely what we've then been saying for the last 2 hours. We got to make sure it doesn't happen, at least in our lifetime, in our children's lifetime. We've got to secure the grid. We have to have a foreign policy that makes sure it doesn't happen.
See, and I think when I was watching Schindler's List, and right at the end, he cried. He broke down and cried, William, because he felt like he didn't do enough. He said, why did I need my car? I could have sold it and saved one Jewish person. Why did I need my watch? I could have sold it and saved one more person. I don't think I'm doing enough. These programs we do are important, but I don't think I'm doing enough.
George, you are reaching millions. You saw the reaction in Asheville when you walked out on the stage. George and I, for listeners, we shared a program in Asheville 3 months ago. For me, to relate directly to your question, a favorite saying from Talmud, he who saves one life saves the whole world. You've saved many, many lives with this program.
Let's not give up. William Forstchen, the name of his new book, The Final Day. It's the end of his trilogy. And folks, contact your congresspeople and your senators. Find out where they are. Call them. Leave a phone number. Send emails. Just say the SHIELD bill. Fix the grid. Protect it from an EMP or solar flare. Maybe, just maybe, we can pull this off. How synchronicity works. What an amazing subject. We're going to talk with Dr. Kirby Surprise about that. That's right. That's his last name, by the way. That's his original family name, Surprise. And we're going to be talking to him about synchronicity when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. Dr. Kirby Surprise with us. Dr. Surprise received his doctorate in psychology in 2007 from the Institute for Integral Studies in San Francisco, a master's in psychodynamic and transpersonal psychology from John F. Kennedy University. He received his license as a psychologist in 2009, currently works in advanced outpatient programs as well. And again, as I mentioned, Surprise is his original name. His book is called How Synchronicity Works. He was back with me about almost 5 years ago. Kirby, welcome back, Doctor. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me back.
Looking forward to this. And yes, your last name is Surprise. What a surprise, right?
Well, surprised about it all my life.
When you were growing up, and you would mention that name, which I think is a powerful name, especially for what you do, did teachers go through that same rigmarole? Is that your real name?
You know, I've gone through that rigmarole from everything from teachers to pizza delivery guys.
I love it. Anyways, let's talk about synchronicity. Let's talk about luck. Let's talk about coincidence. In your opinion, Doctor, what is synchronicity?
Synchronicity is a complex thing. It can be used to explain almost any psychic phenomenon. Can I start by giving an example of synchronicity?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Here's a joke my father told me, which actually illustrates the point. A man wakes up on his 55th birthday. He looks at the alarm clock, and it's 5:55 in the morning. He grabs the remote, turns on the TV. The Channel 5 news is on. It takes 55 minutes to get dressed. Takes the number 5 bus, 5 blocks to his job. Gets on the number 5 elevator, goes to the 5th floor. His office is 5th on the left. Now, he's observant, so now he knows something is up. You know, all these 5s, this can't be a coincidence. So he walks into his office, and on his desk, the janitorial staff has accidentally left a racing form. And he goes, oh, this must be a message from God. So he opens it to the 5th horse in the 5th race, and the horse's name is Your Lucky Fives.
I love it.
So he figures he's going to be rich. He calls his bookie. He bets $5,000 on the horse to win. He waits until 5 o'clock in the afternoon, calls his bookie and says, "How did my horse do?" The man says, "Well, he came in fifth."
I knew you were going to say that. I love it.
You know, and as much of a joke as the story is, this stuff really does happen to people. They run into strings of amazing coincidental events, and they often misinterpret them. Now, for our gambler here, my explanation would be that he's having a lot of anxiety about turning 55. And that anxiety, that inner process, gets reflected out into the environment and back to him. He has made the classic mistake, though, of thinking that this reflection that he sees of his own thoughts and feelings is an indication of objective reality. That the message is not just inside of him, but that's true in the external world. And, I deal with a lot of delusional psychotic patients, and I wrote the book for two kinds of people. The first is people that are seeing these events and are confused by them, don't know what's going on, maybe scared by them, think they're abnormal. And the second is people who are lost in their own little delusional systems. And it's sort of a reality-orienting work. And I've been using it with my clients since I last talked to you. And it really does have the ability, if someone's not, genuinely very psychotic, to relieve a lot of apprehension about the way the environment works around them.
Is synchronicity the same as fate?
No, it's not. The problem with some of the concepts like fate is, when you get into fate and free will, these are philosophical questions.
Right.
And I don't really think in that kind of philosophy because I've studied, the science, mechanics, and theories of time a lot because I've had to sort of piece this together, how we perceive time, how physics perceives time, is there a predetermined timeline? And it looks very much, even in the most modern physics, like, fate is an outdated concept. If you're saying there's fate, what you're saying is that 14 billion years ago there was an event and everything was predetermined by the energy release since then. That's an older model of physics. The newer models of physics are saying that we're living in a vast universe of multiple probabilities, and that the probabilities shift and change, and that nothing is truly, predetermined. Now, as a psychologist, we've seen, for instance, I work in the prison system. Research and statistics are marvelous things. We can, for instance, look at different factors on what would lead a person to be incarcerated. Did they have a two-parent family? Was the income high? Was there drug abuse in the family? Was there mental illness? Do they live in a neighborhood without resources? What's their race? Things like that. And you can actually break down statistically percentages of, what contributes to the outcome. And we can say, with a fair degree of certainty, depending on the conditions a person was raised in, what the probability is that they'll wind up incarcerated or wealthy or any number of factors. But we do have the ability to change that by the choices we make. There's nothing that's purely chance or purely fated, because we kind of can shift the probabilities in our life by what we choose to pay attention to.
Do we make synchronicity happen, or does it happen on its own?
We have a great contributing factor to this. Let me go into the history a little bit about what we know about synchronicity and where the ideas come from.
And how you got involved in this, too. I'd like to hear that.
I can start with that if you like.
All right.
So when I was much younger, I was into meditation and spirituality, and I trained myself, for instance, to do lucid dreaming, and things that a lot of young people get into and that we learn throughout our lives. When I was an undergraduate, suddenly there was an incredible burst of synchronistic activity around me. I would walk into a room, shelves would fall down, lights would go out, and people would be wondering what's going on. I'd walk into a restaurant and place an order, and over the radio, a song would come about the exact order I just placed, all kinds of very, very strange. I was very panicked by all this, In psychology, there's a symptom called thoughts of reference, which is basically saying, well, if you report that something you thought happened in the environment, or that the environment gave you a message, there's a thought that's referencing the environment, it used to be considered a symptom of something. Not necessarily anything particular, but something weird's happening, we need to look into this. So at the time I was an undergraduate psychology student, and, I figured that I'd gone crazy. There was something wrong with me if I'm walking through a world and, TVs and radios talk to you and people give you answers to questions you only asked in your head and things like that. To my mind, that's delusional material. So in the midst of being completely confused about all this, one day I was taking a friend of mine up to the college to go to a class, and I was going to wait for him outside. It was a fall day in New York, and I parked the car in a parking lot that was sort of nose first into a hillside. And about 50 yards down on the left from this hillside, there was a cottage, and this cottage was used to house visiting faculty. I was going to wait there for my friend. On the way over, we happened to be joking about our favorite National Enquirer headlines. Things like, Pope has alien love child.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we were just laughing, wishing we could get a job like that someday. And one of the stories that we were laughing about was that, there had been a house on Long Island that had been possessed, and during the exorcism, it turned over on its side. We thought that was hysterical. So, I dropped him off, and I'm sitting there, the window's up and the radio on, and a commercial for the Stephen King movie Carrie comes on. And I think, well, that's interesting. The last couple of scenes of that movie, this teenager who has telekinetic abilities has herself a psychotic break and basically crushes the house into rubble, and that's, how it ends. So, being a psychology student, I'm really curious about, how things affect people. And I'm thinking, well, I know people don't move objects, but how would it change you if you could? Our psychologies are based on our physical beings. Our brains are there to process bits of sensory information, and, everything we are is based on you have to get up and cross the room for a glass of water, or go out and hunt, or go to work. It's not, I'll make it happen and come to me. So I was wondering how your personal psychology would be if you could do it with your mind and physicality was taken out of it. So I'm looking at this cottage, and I'm thinking, wow, what would it feel like to actually be able to make the thing roll over on its side, like in the National Enquirer headline? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't it be great? As I'm watching this, the building starts to shudder. And, no joke, the building rolls over on its side until the roof is facing me. And I got to know what it's like. I was in a complete state of panic because, this is a violation of everything I understood about how reality works. So, I managed to calm myself down and going, well, what's the possible explanations? Did I do this? No. There's never been a good demonstration of telekinesis anywhere at any time. People don't do that. Okay, but the house still rolled over. There it is. Okay, am I asleep? So I've been used to lucid dreaming before, so I have a little checklist in my head, like, what happened just before this, and no, I'm not dreaming. This is real. And yet, I'm still looking at this house that's been turned over. So then I said, okay, if I did that, then I want to see the house crush itself into rubble, just like in the Carrie movie. Immediately, the top of the house begins to cave in. The windows are shattering, 2x4s are coming through the walls. It's crushing in on itself, and I can't even describe the state of panic I'm in watching this actually happening. And then there's a flash of yellow paint above the house, and this huge bulldozer climbs over the top of the house, finishes crushing it into rubble, and begins loading the wreckage into dump trucks that I couldn't see because the house had been blocking them. There was a perfectly rational explanation for all the events that happened, but they coincided exactly with the internal state I was going through, what I was looking for, what had happened on the radio. Everything was this coordinated sequence, synchronizing my internal process with the events that had been happening on the outside. Now, I'd been reading of Carl Jung, who said that, these events were caused by archetypes, and because those archetypes were outside of time and space, they were literally, the causes were unthinkable, untraceable, and you would never figure it out. But here, there was a clear link between internal mental and emotional processes, the subconscious, and the events on the outside. And I realized that, while this is thinkable, there is a link to people's inner states, a very direct one. And if that's true, then there is a way to figure out what's actually going on here. So I sort of figured, well, the unconscious probably knows more about this than I do.
Yeah.
And what I'm probably seeing is some partial projection of my unconscious process. So I just asked the unconscious to explain what this is. And then I followed the pattern and, read the physics that was suggested and the coincidences that led me to this book or that book. And gradually I came across, a model that said that we're doing this. Because everybody's got an explanation. Jung hit archetypes. Some people have their gods, ancestors. People try to say that, synchronicity happens because alien contact is happening. All these different explanations. They turn out to be reflections. So, for instance, most people have seen people who keep a pet bird in a cage. And very often there's a mirror in the cage with the bird. Now, the reason the mirror is there is because the bird's brain is not sophisticated enough to know what a reflection is. Essentially, instead of maintaining two birds, you put a mirror in, and the first bird thinks there's a second bird in the mirror, and then socializes with it, and it keeps them company. Now, there's a test of self-awareness that's, used by people who are into zoology and animals, and it's called the mirror test. And they'll put an animal in front of a mirror, and they can tell by whether or not the animal touches himself as he's looking in the mirror, whether or not they get that that's a reflection or not. If they understand it's a reflection, it's a level of self-awareness that most animals don't have. Self-aware animals can include dolphins, elephants, a lot of species of primates, some birds and dogs. Synchronicity is very much the same thing. Do you recognize that these events are being caused by your own internal states, by the things that you have focused on? What you're filtering for, the gaps that you're filling in, what you've been concerned with recently. So this is why, it's a mirroring effect.
Is there a science behind it, Kirby?
Yes, there is. There's both neurology and physics. When you talk about synchronicity, you're always talking about what the internal process of the person is and what the events are that happened around them. Now, the science of it, there's a history. The first part of the history was Carl Jung, who saw these events and said, well, the explanation is there has to be these universal archetypal patterns out there in hyperspace. He called it, a psychoid space. Two of his stories were that, he was researching the fish archetype, and he suddenly had all these synchronicities around fish, ancient inscriptions, people mentioning stuff to him. And he said, well, this must be an example of the fish archetype clustering events around itself, both the people and the external events. He also has a famous example of a woman he's doing therapy with. And this one was had this hard kind of Cartesian, unemotional logic about her that he was trying to break through to get to the emotional person underneath. And he just couldn't get there with her. So he was doing a session with her. And she told him this story about a dream in which there was this scarab beetle, and she kept going on and on about analyzing the significance of it, and he just wanted her to feel something.
Mm-hmm.
So as he's sitting there bored, wondering how he's going to break through, this mask of hers, there's a tapping at the window, fluttering. So he gets up, he goes to the window and opens it, and there's a really large scarab beetle at the windowsill. So he picks it up, brings it to her and said, well, here's your scarab.
Here you go. Yeah.
Here you go. And, it kind of broke through the pattern for her. Now, in both cases, there's no archetype to be found. He was thinking about fish, and all its mythology and representation. His thoughts created the pattern around him. In the case of the therapy session, it's both of their patterns. It's her dream manifesting as a coincidence at the window, and his desire to break through to her to some emotional level with something she couldn't explain that produces, the bug at the window that, he then uses in the therapy session.
Stay with us, Doctor. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk more about synchronicity. Dr. Kirby Surprise with us. His new book is called How Synchronicity Works. Welcome back to Coast. We're with Dr. Kirby Surprise. His book is How Synchronicity Works. Kirby, intention. Does intention play a part of any of this?
A great deal. So we tend to sort the environment. I mean, what we are evolutionarily is we're pattern matchers. Physically, we're obviously not very strong. Our teeth and claws aren't worth much.
Right.
What we've done is develop a strategy where, let me give some background for your listeners.
Okay.
So you're in a very interesting situation right now in the room around you. You have billions of little sensory devices pointed into the environment that are producing digital electrical signals that go to this massive biocomputer in your head, the brain. The brain's purpose is to store these sensory signals, sort through them, and come up with strategies to aid your survival. Now, the first thing it has to do when it does this is delete the majority of the information that's not relevant, and then look at the patterns that are not complete and fill them in. The room around you right now, you're not seeing what's actually out there. What you're seeing is a simulation that's constructed in an area of memory in the brain. So science fiction often almost gets it right. Like Star Trek has holodecks, where you step onto this holodeck and it becomes any environment you want. And then you can tell the computer, delete this, change this, I'd rather see this. The brain is actually doing this for you automatically. You have no direct contact with the outside world. You, the conscious part that you identify as yourself, is about the size of a walnut on the front left area of the brain. You're sort of this auxiliary processing unit that can try to make decisions about things. All your memory information is in the back half of the brain. The front half, the executive function part, selectively calls patterns from memory and compares them, holds 7 or 8 things together at once, and makes decisions about what priorities are. So you are always sort of photoshopping the environment. Now, synchronicity is a direct reflection of all these processes. What you're seeing when a synchronistic event happens is something that you have been paying attention to or have been concerned about. This is not just a conscious thing, where I want this to happen. It's more like everything that your brain has been processing, and the brain is very, very active. The Freudians had made the mistake of thinking that the unconscious was sort of this dumping ground. What's actually happening is it's a supercomputer that's constantly working, waking or asleep, processing information, trying to figure out how to help you survive, running simulations about what's happened to you, what the people around you want, how the world works. All of this gets projected forward as synchronistic events in the environment. Now, that's a crazy thing to say, on its surface. The universe obviously is not going to be altered by what any individual thinks all the time. And yet, the synchronistic events happen. Later on in the program, we'll talk about the model that actually has a rational explanation for this.
Okay.
Your question about intent is right on target. The intent is not only conscious but unconscious. So what you're looking for in the environment is going to cause synchronistic events to reflect back to you. Now, it's not all good. For instance, if someone has experienced a horrible trauma when they're a child, let's say they get molested by a parent. Now, that affects how the child sees their entire reality from that point on.
Mm-hmm.
They know that powerful figures can't be trusted. They are afraid of things. There's a lot of emotional trauma and
they're suspicious of everybody.
That happens. That too gets projected. So you can wind up with people with paranoid synchronicity events.
Mm-hmm.
They think something's out to get them. And the problem with this is these events always reflect back to you what you are already looking for. Now, intent, you can use that. For example, when I first keyed into the fact that these were reflective events, I set up a series of formats I would use to see if I could cause synchronistic events to happen the way I wanted them to happen. The first one I tried was really simple. It was playing a chess game with the environment. So you basically, intend, you look for things related to chess around you. Now, the brain naturally filters things. So you might find, that suddenly you think a lot of events related to chess are happening that haven't been happening. Well, in fact, probably a lot of it has already been there. It's just that you don't remember it. It doesn't have any valence. The brain only remembers things that have an emotional charge on them. We call it a valence charge. So the vast majority of your experience every day is deleted because it's not interesting. There's no valence. When I became interested in seeing chess symbols in the environment, they appear. I met a couple of Mr. Bishops and advertisements for White Castle come on, and you see the symbols start to show up around you more and more frequently.
More stories about the Queen.
Yeah, exactly. Now,
you there? I think we may have lost you, Kirby. We'll try to get you back on here. Let me see if he's there. Are you there, Kirby?
Yeah, hi, sorry.
There you go. I don't know where you went, but
okay.
You're with us.
So let me continue with what happened with Jung, because it bears directly on this point. Jung didn't believe you could influence the environment. He was very conscious about, his career. He already came up with some ideas that were pretty improvable, and he didn't even come to synchronicity until later in his life. Now, one of his contemporaries was Dr. J.B. Rhine, who was a psychologist at Duke University. Now, one day, a gambler walks into Rhine's office, and he says, "Look, Doc, I know this sounds nuts, but I can influence the way the dice come up." And, Rhine was a real scientist.
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
he said, "Okay, show me." So they took out 10 pairs of dice and a notebook. And he said, "Okay, we're going to do 100 throws of these dice, and I want you to make the number 6 come up more often than average." So they did the run, they did 100 tosses and did the record keeping, and sure enough.
And it should come, let's see, so they're spinning just one dice 100 times.
No, they're throwing 10 sets. So, altogether 20 dice.
10 sets of 2, okay.
Right, they threw them 100 times. I recorded every face as they came up to see, what the average was. And they said the guy had to target the number 6. And it works. The guy comes in about 6% above normal on this. And, Ryan's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not possible." So they did a couple more times, and sure enough, the guy's hitting 3, 4, 6% above average.
Yeah, which is amazing.
And Ryan becomes obsessed. You know, he designs machines that throw the dice for you so there's no human contact. He, you know, does every conceivable thing to take the, you know, no contact with the dice. He tries coin tosses. He tries all kinds of random stuff, and he's finding that people do this. There's a 3 to 6% change in probability.
Is that what got him into this? Investigations with this?
Yes, that's what, you know, got him into the whole paranormal thing. And now, he said, well, you know, let's see if we can find some other things about this. So he tried, one of his first experiments was gamblers versus preachers. You know, he got some ministers and some gamblers and ran them through the dice test to see, you know, if being, you know, spiritual, unquote, had an effect. And he found out there was no difference, you know, for religion or for sort of, you know, moral fortitude to your ability to do this.
Now, were some people better than others?
Marginally. Everybody's got some ability. There's no sort of superhuman people out there, you know, that can do this automatically to a tremendous degree if they're untrained.
And 70% of the time or anything like that.
Yeah. Now, he did find things like he gave people alcohol and made them do the runs, and they weren't as good at it. He gave people caffeine.
That's why Vegas pours it for free, right?
That is actually true. That is actually the reason they do it. You know?
Wow.
They found that caffeine increases the ability a little bit. So he's looking and he's saying, well, brain activity is affected by, you know, stimulants and depressants. Something neurological is happening. So here we have a neurological link to an external event. Now, he also tried to find, you know, is there any like electromagnetic or pushing and pulling on the dice? You know? They found no physical forces involved. Then he did something that was really remarkable. He realized that there was a pattern that matched the emotional condition of the clients. So, for instance, say people were doing a long set of dice toss. They're doing it 100 times. At the very beginning, the dice will come up on the target fairly consistently above average. Then when you go in about 25% of the runs, it drops to absolute normal average. Then, you know, towards the middle of this long set of dice tosses, the target is suppressed. It's happening less often than average. There's this curve appearing. Then, after the midpoint of the experiment, the curve comes back up to average, and towards the end, the ability to influence the target as you want it is even stronger. And he figured out that what's going on is, in the beginning, the person is excited. They're interested. They're paying attention. They want to know if they have this magical power, you know? But after 25 tosses, they get bored. You know, it becomes sort of a drag. You know, here we go doing it again. By the middle of the experiment, they don't even want to do it anymore. You know, they wish they had stopped. The negative emotion suppresses the probability of hitting the target. Towards the end, they get excited again. Wow, I'm going to get to see how I did. What's the outcome? I get to stop throwing these dumb dice for a while. And the ability comes back. And he realized that what he was seeing was that, you know, the ability to affect the dice was following the emotional pattern of the attention and emotion of the subjects.
So if somebody was negative, chances are they wouldn't be as accurate as somebody who is upbeat and positive?
Yes, you're getting what you want. If you don't want it to happen, you suppress the ability. Now, let's go back to my original story about the house moving. There's no physical energy involved in this. It's not a physical thing. So there's also no sort of limit on the size of the thing that can happen, whether it's a house or a dice on a tabletop. Ryan tried coins, he tried radioactive decay, random number generators. He found this was consistent through everything. Now, what I'm proposing is pretty simple. There's not much you can relate to about a die toss on a tabletop. Not a lot of emotional content there. There is a tremendous amount of emotional valence in the environment around you. Ryan's experiments could not capture complex emotional or cognitive states because you're just looking at numbers on a die. Our environment is constantly bombarding us with information that we make associations to, things that we have emotions about, make judgments about, things that remind us about things that happened to us in the past. You know, we are the universe's greatest supercomputers. You know, the brain in your head has more computational power than every computer on the planet networked together at once. It's vast. And it's operating on the environment and remembering all the emotional nuances of everything that's happened to you and looking for similar patterns. Now, you are actually creating the patterns somewhat in the environment. Now, lest this sound, completely, unnecessary, you got to remember that living organisms always find a way to survive. So our original ancestors, were 100-pound naked people standing on the grassland with a pointy stick, and they were hungry, had to get something to eat. What they were looking at in East Africa, where we all came from, was vast grasslands with the wind blowing an infinite number of intricate patterns across the grass, with the sun creating patterns, cloud shadows, and in that incredibly camouflaged and complex environment were many creatures who themselves had developed their own natural camouflage. Our talent became seeing through the camouflage, okay, looking at the patterns. Okay, when do we know we have enough information to throw the spear at this particular shadow?
Right.
And how do we know that that's an antelope and not a lion?
How close, Kirby, is synchronicity from luck? We talked about fate, but what about luck?
We can change events by about, 3 to 6%. Yes, there's some luck in that. The problem with being human is that the environment is so complex that nobody ever figures it all out. Physicists are telling us now that what we see in the universe is 4% of what's there. Everything else is dark matter and energy. We know it's there. We don't know how it works. We can't detect it. Our lives are like this. We are in the same kind of complex, unpredictable environments that our ancient ancestors were, even with all our technology. And, there is a lot of random. But in that random environment, you have the ability to steer about 3 to 6%, to change things.
So now, that seems to be the percent that this works in.
Yes. Now, we're not vast beings. I like to, think of it like gravitation in some ways. We have a little bit of mass in our bodies and a little bit of influence on everything around us. Not a vast amount. I think that, very sort of overly conservative scientists believe we have no influence. That's wrong. The science I can talk about later, actually, the modern science is saying that, the most important question we're dealing with right now in physics is the fact that when we observe an experiment, it changes the events.
Kirby, how would you explain this? I'm in Vegas several years ago with producer Tom, who has been talking to you tonight. And in the middle is some guy, and we're playing blackjack. And we're playing at a special blackjack table that has a wheel that if you get a blackjack and you put $1 in a little tiny circle, you get to spin the wheel. And it pays up to $1,000. So when Tom's playing, I'm playing, and this guy in the middle is playing. I got $1 in this little circle. I get a blackjack. So we get to have the wheel spun for us. And as the guy begins to spin it, Tom and I are saying to each other, think 1,000, think 1,000, because it pays $1 to $1,000. And we're thinking 1,000, and this thing's clicking along. And the guy in the middle keeps saying, that won't work, nonsense, that won't work. We're watching the wheel. Tom and I, we're thinking again, think 1,000, think 1,000, and it's going click, 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 click. It's getting so close to 1,000, And the guy in the middle continues to say, won't happen, won't happen. It stops one click away from $1,000. We ended up getting $1 back. Did that guy affect that with that negativity?
No.
He did not.
Now, here's why. You have to bear with a little bit of explanation here. So, the reason why you can seeming to affect the environment is not because there's energy coming off of you that's changing things around you. So the big problem with synchronicity and human influence has always been synchronicity shows up in everything. You know, it can be the dice on the table, the way the cigarette smoke rises in your hand, or the way the meteor shower happens. You know, it's like it can be in cosmic events or subatomic events, and it's still following your attention.
Kirby, hold on. We're at the top of the hour already. I want to pick this up when we come right back. Plus, we'll talk more about your work, how synchronicity works, and we'll take phone calls, stories of synchronicity, or questions for Dr. Kirby Surprise when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. Great interview with Dr. Kirby Surprise, author of How Synchronicity Works, and we're going to come back after we chat a little bit more and take your questions and maybe your stories of synchronicity as well. And I still got to get his reaction to that guy who was sandwiched between Tom and I playing blackjack a couple of years ago at an event we were at in Las Vegas. He was a buzzkill, but we'll get Dr. Kirby's take on that in a moment. Okay, welcome back with Dr. Kirby Surprise. Kirby, we were talking about the guy in the middle of our blackjack game, and you were just explaining how you didn't think he affected the outcome. Go ahead.
Okay, how about this? How would we do something that might be really fun for your audience to say?
Okay.
All right. We are going to give everyone in your audience a real, legitimate superpower, something that's better than anything they've seen in the movies or the comic books. We're going to show you how you can reflect your thoughts directly off the environment, and we're going to give you a rational explanation on how you do it.
Okay.
Okay, this is something everybody already does automatically because you're human. Everybody lives in clouds of their own synchronistic events. Everything reflects what you're thinking and feeling. One of the things we've seen in this last political year is that people have been in sort of their own bubbles. Liberals and conservatives are listening to sources of information that are based on what they already think. They go to blogs and websites that reflect the opinions they already have, get reinforced, events basically from them that, seem to confirm what they already believe. Sort of the way synchronicity works. Now, here's the way doing this is actually rational. Our ancient ancestors and all the mystical traditions always talked about other dimensions of consciousness. And for a long time, our scientists said, yeah, right, those are just ignorant savages and that was nice for them, but this is reality. Well, it turns out we have a completely new standard model of physics now called M-theory. And M-theory states that we are not the only probability here. There are an infinite amount of universes right in the same space that each one is slightly different. In fact, every possible set of events already exists in one of these probabilities. Now, a lot of physicists are talking about maybe creating gravitational phones, maybe calling the universe next door. In fact, there's been a whole series of jokes about, Elvis is still playing Vegas in the universe next door. Lots of science fiction programs, when they run out of plots in their fifth season, do things like the characters fall into the alternate universe where there's the evil Spock and Kirk kind of thing. Well, instead of thinking of these alternates as something you would have to pass through a doorway to get to, think of it this way. You already exist on a range of them, and you're moving through them. The way time actually works is it moves from probability to probability. The distance between the probabilities is the smallest conceivable unit of energy. So we are actually moving at the speed of light through probability. Your thoughts and your attention, your emotion, your internal process steer you through all these probabilities. Now, There's distances in these dimensions the same way there is here, but they're not quite the same. For instance, the distance between the probability of me when I hang up going to the refrigerator or going to sit on the couch is very small. I can do either one. There's not a lot of effort. The probability that I'm going to be the first astronaut that lands on Mars, well, that's a huge distance in probability. What we do is we move our direction. Everybody knows that we're moving through time. That's become pretty obvious.
Right.
We're also moving through probability. We exist, each person, on a large range of probabilities. So does everyone around us. And our field of probability intersects with everybody's. Now, at that roulette wheel, you have...
Blackjack.
Blackjack, sorry, with the little wheel in the center.
But it was a wheel, you're right.
Yeah. Everybody there is at the center of their own probability. They're traveling in probability. They move to the probability that closely reflects their internal process. Everybody is traveling, so to speak. Now, there is a collective aspect to it, but you're not influencing the environment. You're changing your position in probability. Now, there are probabilities where any one of those numbers could have come up. Okay, you're changing your position, they're changing their positions. So, as far as influencing the environment goes, you can format the entire environment to a personal mythology. You know, if you're a Star Wars fan, the universe will be filled with the Force, and, you know, you can play Jedi if you want to. You know, you'll get synchronicities, meaningful coincidences, not actual events, that reflect that back to you. Everybody lives in this all the time. And if you think about it, it gives you the ability to live in the type of universe that you want to be in.
Well, here's an example. When you listen to the radio and you're thinking of a certain song and it comes up, or if you're thinking of a person and the phone rings and it's that person, is it synchronicity that's creating the person to call you, or are we making the person call us?
Neither. You have moved to a probability where the person called you. There are probabilities where the person didn't call you. There are probabilities where that person had you call them. You don't cause the actual event. There are an infinite number of probable universes.
But the probability of you thinking of the person and them calling at the same time is pretty astronomical, isn't it?
Right, but what's happened is you had the thought or feeling, and the conditions were close enough so that you moved to a probability where it actually happened. Now, for instance, one of the questions that comes up is, okay, if this is how come it works, how come you don't win the lottery? Well, you have a 3 to 6% alteration rate in the probability around you, and winning the lottery is 100 million to 1. Isn't that?
That's right.
You know, now, the most important part of this is not simply playing reflection games. The reflections you're seeing reflect all of your internal processes, not just the conscious ones that you're paying attention to at the moment or the ones you intend to happen. It's your complete personality and all the contents of your unconscious, as well as whatever transpersonal stuff is going on around you. The environment is literally reflecting the meaning of what you are as a being back to you in its totality. And by paying attention to the environment, you get to see who you really are. You get to see what you're thinking about, what your concerns are, you know, where you've been putting your attention. This is the most powerful tool of self-discovery ever imagined. Instead of looking out, I mean, you have a blurb, you know, between your show segments about, you know, you're not a liberal or a conservative, you're just giving the information, but you're still being accused of being that.
That's right.
Okay.
Either way.
Either way. Well, it's because the people that are listening to the information are formatting it according to what they already think and believe. This is why, you know, we live in a very interesting era. We have a huge amount of input going on around us. And people are falling into these little grooves where they're thinking that the feedback they're getting is truth. They're thinking it's real. Well, most of it is coming to them because that's what they already think. If you think about, religious fundamentalists who are having problems all around the world, okay, they're not crazy. What's happening is they've been given a belief system, and they've been told, look out into the world, and God will confirm this is true. And because they're looking for the belief system, they see synchronicities that seem to confirm that it's real. And we all do this. We do it with religious beliefs, with politics, our beliefs about the emotions of others and how people react to us. We are living in a vast network of synchronicities that are created by our own experiences and thoughts. Now, it can be good or bad. Like I said, if you've been highly traumatized, it's likely that the environment's not going to be treating you very well because you're still processing the trauma from the past. But if you realize this, if you realize that how you see the world is based on what you're projecting out into it and what's being reflected back to you, then you choose the kind of world you live in. Now, I'm not saying that, the collective evils of the world go away, but if you have the chance to change your experience of reality positively by 6%, over time, you can make vast differences in how your life feels to you.
Yeah, I bet you
And
could.
everybody does this all the time. It's a real superpower. To give a scientific example, I mentioned on the first show that, when I was studying experimental design for my doctorate, one of the first things they teach you is the best experimental design is called a double blind. It's where, somebody designs the experiment, but the people that are participants and the people that are administering it don't know what the experiment is about.
Right.
They're doubly blind. The reason is we have learned that observing an experiment changes the outcome. Now, this is not because you're cheating or have an unconscious bias. It's because literally observing something with the expectation of how it's going to happen changes the way things happen. This is synchronicity. We've had to adapt to it in the very core of science and experimental procedure. Roger Penrose, who is Hawkins' math teacher, basically, wrote a wonderful book called The Road to Reality, which is the mathematical basis for modern physics and its history. And towards the back of the book, he starts talking about some of the most fundamental problems, and they're problems of consciousness, of the observer and the experiment. Right now, the most advanced physics we have is spooky. We're seeing objects that you separate that affect each other at tremendous distances. We're seeing that, things don't really exist until you try to measure them. And the math is telling us without a doubt that, for instance, if you try to find out where an electron is, you have to start looking universally and then paring it down until you find the most probable location, because when you're not looking at it, it's not really there. Now, how do we wrap our heads around this kind of thing? We start to learn that our consciousness, what we look for, affects what happens in the environment. Most high school student science classes have taught the electron split screen experiment. You take an electron gun like in old-style TV, you fire the electron beam at, a piece of paper with two slits in it, and there's a phosphorus screen in the back. What you see on the phosphorus screen is a series of 6 bands. So if you're firing particles, electrons, through the slits, why are you getting bands? Well, it's because they're acting like waves. They're interfering with each other after they come through the slits. Now, that part is weird enough. But then they find that if you fire the electrons one at a time, they still interfere with each other. And even stranger, if you focus your attention on one of the bands, the electrons land there more often, just like the dice tosses. What this means is your attention has altered events back in time, at least to the point where the electron gun released the electron. You are affecting the probability of reality.
Back to the roulette in blackjack for a moment. Did Tom and I at least get that click as close to that 1,000 as we were thinking? It was one click away.
You know, there's no way to tell for sure any individual event. So science, for instance, real scientists will not tell you what's absolutely true. What we do is we use mathematics to tell you how probable it is an event will occur. We cannot tell you what an individual event will do because things are so complex that what we're looking for is generalized patterns. All of our science is based on this. So it's impossible to account for every factor that happened at the blackjack table. Now, we know in general you have a little bit of influence. What happened for that particular event, we can't trace to one thing. What I'm saying to the audience is you have an amazing ability to reflect your thoughts off the environment. And you're never going to be sure exactly how accurate the pattern is, but you are going to be able to produce it. It does happen, and you can use it. You can use it for amusement. You can use it to explore the nature of the universe. You can use it to explore who you really are as a person.
Will synchronicity happen if you don't even try it or push for it?
It's always happening, always. Here's what happens to us typically in the Western cultures. You know, before you're 5 years old or so, you know, it's all Disney, wish upon a star, and, you know, if you want it bad enough, it's going to happen in magic. Then, when you get to be about 8 years old, they start saying, okay, well, fun time's over. The universe is cause and effect, and you can't actually affect anything, and this is a hard reality, and you have to live as an adult now. Well, in nature, developmental stages do not change each other. Everything that you learned at 5 is still valid, only at 8 you have a wider, more inclusive perspective, and when you get to be an adult, it's even wider and more inclusive than that. When we teach children that your thoughts do not affect the environment, that, you know, how you feel does not affect the events around you, that's cognitive castration, and it's a lie. What you believe does affect your environment. You know, when you are looking, everybody's got stories about looking for a job opportunity or a used car, or they needed help with something, and a coincidence happens that helps them achieve what they're looking for. Now, some people say, well, it must be divine intervention, it must be this or that. Well, the reality is they tweaked the environment. They moved themselves in probability a few percentages to the point where what they needed became available in front of them. This is what we used to do as hunters. You know, we need the antelope. We look for it. Well, we see through the camouflage, but we also create like a 5% greater chance that we're actually going to succeed on the hunt. As people, you know, we're still what we used to be back then. We hunt for many things: mates, information, jobs, amusement, many different things. And we have the ability, because we're organisms, because we have feelings and direction and attention, to move towards the probabilities where those things we want are fulfilled.
Are many as important as the one in making some of these things happen collectively?
Well, this is pure speculation. I mean, I try in what I talk about to talk about what we know, which is more the scientific stuff, and what's explanatory fiction, which is, well, this fits the facts, but it can't be proved. I can tell you this. The most vexing problem in all of mathematics, physics, philosophy, and spirituality is the same problem. Okay? That particle that exists until you look for it, when you're not looking at it, it's universal. It exists everywhere in time and space until you try to measure it. Human beings have been wanting to be one with the infinite forever. The question is, how does the individual become transcendental? What is the relationship exactly between the one and the many? Now, in the physics of math, there's no explanation for the transition. They know it's there, but there's no plausible mathematical model. In spirituality, they know it happens. People hit states of satori, they become enlightened, but there's no understanding what the process is.
It's a great question. Kirby, we're going to come back and take some questions for you when we wrap up next on Coast to Coast AM. And we're going to get to your calls with Dr. Kirby Surprise, author of How Synchronicity Works, when we come right back on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast. Dr. Kirby Surprise with us, How Synchronicity Works. We'll tell you where you can get the book in a moment. Let's go to the calls. Lisa in San Diego. Lisa, you're on with us. Go ahead.
Hi. Actually, my original question that I was going to ask was, since I've been on hold, kind of partially answered, and it had to do with kids and synchronicity. But I thought of something else that actually is a little bit more interesting as far as like what I would like to have an answer for.
Sure.
And it has to do with a bodiless spirit, basically. I travel a lot for work, and my roommate says when I'm gone, the light in my bedroom keeps coming on by itself. And then on occasion, when he, doesn't bother to turn it back off, it also turns off by itself. And this hadn't happened while I was home at all. Well, on Christmas night, just recently, I was thinking about this friend of mine who had died almost a year ago. And the day after he died, a light bulb in my bathroom started stuttering and doing this weird thing. And I thought, I felt it was him. And so in my mind, I thought, maybe it's him that's turning my light off and on. And so what I did was I sent him like a message in like an email message, even though he wasn't going to get it, obviously. But I said, if it's you turning my light off and on, you must be with me. And I said, so I'm not going to turn my light on until you do. And 20 minutes later, the light came on.
Okay, so Kirby, would that be synchronicity?
Absolutely. One of the things that happens in synchronicity is you can create very complex formats. Now, I'm just going to take the ghost part off the table.
Okay.
Because I can't know the reality of that, not being involved in the situation. One of the things that does happen, though, is that people project personalities onto the events. One of the things we do as humans is we create models of people in our minds. And we were evolved to be able to keep track of about 60 individuals. That would be our sort of tribal group. Who they are, what their personalities, likes and dislikes are, who they're involved with, things like that. We can project into the environment complete personalities. Like, for instance, a lot of religious folks see synchronicities, and the format has a God figure behind it, that behaves in certain ways. Now, of course, the personality part of that varies from religion to religion. But if you were to assume that there was a personality behind the synchronistic events, and you were to look for that personality, it would show up. I've had many clients who, in their delusional states, thought that they were, talking to God or spirits, or, the events were based on something with an intent. But once you teach them that they're reflections, they realize that it's because that's part of their explanation for the events. We want to see things that we know are meaningful as being caused by something. And caused by something for us usually means assuming some kind of personality. And I've had many events that, are my own reflections, that I've seen, various kinds of personalities I've designed and implemented consciously or unconsciously causing the events. A lot of physical events, like I've had a lot of electrical phenomena around me. I mean, just huge amounts of things. Lights, exploding extension cords, computers that did funny things. And if I were to assume that there was an entity behind them, they tend to start acting as if there's something trying to give me a message. If I change my mythology to something else, then the pattern changes to seem to reflect something else. I don't know about non-physical states. I'm a scientist. So I do know that anything that we experience, that we are consciously aware of, has to be based on brain activity. It has to be something neurological in our heads. Outside of the physical brain, I have no clue to tell you what's happening.
But it's possible, right, that things like that could happen outside of the physical brain.
Well, the book Synchronicity that I wrote has a complex metaphysical explanation that uses thought forms and theories about astral and mental bodies to show what the relation to time and space and physicality is. It's actually a manual on how to use this power in a lot of ways. But it's an explanatory fiction. If you can't test it and you can't have it repeat, then you can enjoy it and note it and, gain comfort with it, but there's no certainty involved. Good scientists don't tell you what's real. They tell you what's probable. And if it's good science, it can tell you what's probable to a very exact degree. And I also believe, though, on the flip side, that things that science can't measure, we don't have the instrumentality to do it, it should not discount.
Let's go next to Marty in San Rafael, California. First-time caller. Hi, Marty. Go ahead. You're on with Dr. Kirby Surprise.
Well, first thing I have to say is I've been a listener for decades and never called in.
Well, thank you for calling in.
Really appreciate what you've done over the years and how much I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
To Dr. Surprise, well, great name, kind of synchronistic maybe. Coincidence.
I believe so.
But I wanted to talk to you about some of the synchronistic events in my own life, and hopefully they'll make you laugh, but also it posits a question. I posit a question for you, that if it's also more than mere reflecting back. And I'll explain. I guess the easiest way is just to give you one. I tend to interact in my synchronistic events sometimes. I never dignify a mere coincidence as a synchronistic event. I always look at it to be a coincidence beyond coincidence. And but the most compelling ones that I've had in my lifetime have been interactions with other people. I'll explain. I moved to Marin County years ago to counsel dying people and do mountain biking. And when I did that, I was attached to a number of spiritual groups, including some people from CIIS in the city there. And one of the sons of one of the people in the car that I was with, we were driving in a little town nearby, and he says, "You're not strange like all my mother's other spiritual friends." He says, "What makes you tick?" And I said, "Well, let me see if I can explain it to you." I said, "Right now, would there be an event that could happen that would make you say, gee, how did that just happen? Can you think of something that you couldn't imagine happening? Like some people say when they go looking for a red Volkswagen, they'll suddenly see red Volkswagens all over the place." And by the way, the line sounds dead. Are you there?
Yeah.
Great. And he says, if I saw a red Ferrari right now, that would be pretty dramatic. And within 15 seconds, from back around the corner on the other street, a red Ferrari turns the corner. He says, "How'd you make that happen? How'd you do that?" I said, "I didn't do anything, of course." That's just the way it is. And he says, "Wow, I've got chills all over." Now that's a light one, but there are multi-level ones that I have had with people all the time throughout my life. And if you're interested, I'll give you one more, even more.
Yeah, give us one more short one, Marty.
Okay. Let's see. I'll go for girlfriend. Girlfriend was nice enough to be doing my laundry. I told her she could always just take it to the laundry. She sees me one day taking socks and putting them up on top of the dresser. They were all white socks, but they were all different lengths, and some had stripes and some didn't. She says, "What are you doing with those socks?" I said, "Well, I'm separating them into pairs." And she says, "What do you mean they're pairs? They're white socks." And I hold them up, and socks are of different lengths, I said, "See, they're not pairs." She says, "That's crazy." So I sit on the sofa for a moment, I look at her, and I say, "You know what?" And we had just received a crock, a large crock like you'd put cookies in almost, from a cellular phone company filled with double bubble gum. Now, every double bubble...
Used to love that as a kid, by the way, Marty.
Double bubble gum, as you know, has a fortune on the bottom, a comic, and a fortune on the bottom of every comic. And I'm sitting all the way across the room, sitting on the sofa, and I said to her, as she was ranting about these socks that I was wearing, I said, "Why don't you pull a double bubble gum out of there?" And she says, okay. She lifts it up, pulls a double bubble gum out, and verbatim, the fortune says, "It's time for a new attitude. Start with the socks." She starts screaming, "How do you do these things? How do you do these things?" And these go on and on in my life, where there's always some kind of odd interaction where I'm helping somebody go through the synchronicity, and it will be typically new people. Sometimes they'll be connected in my life for a little bit of time, but they always walk out of my life feeling they experience. They would say the voice of God. I say, I don't know. It's the voice of God, the universe, all the rest.
Well, let's get in with Kirby here, Marty. Kirby, you would not say the voice of God. That I know. Am I correct?
Well, I would say that that's out of my range.
All right.
What I would say was that the common factor is that, you're seeing things that you were looking for. You're causing the events. Now, there's an interesting thing you said that, you've been doing this for a while. Now, this ability feeds on attention. So, most people shut the stuff out. They're told it doesn't exist, and the brain gets this instruction to stop filtering for this. So they don't see them. But there's a thing I call the trail, which is if you see one event and then look for more, they increase, and they get more and more intense. Eventually you can get into spaces where literally the environment's reflecting every thought and emotion you have instantly, moment to moment. Now, it's an extremely difficult place to live in, and a lot of people get psychotic because, they can't differentiate, static the signal from the noise anymore. If you have been doing this with people for a while and been looking at it for a while, then you have trained your attention to deal with these events, and you'll produce them more often. And there are people that develop this superpower as a natural ability. Because I sort of sense you're very benevolent in the way you deal with your life, your synchronicities also are benevolent. I mean, I've had synchronicities with my wife where, we're having an argument about something and the television settles the argument. And then she goes, "See, the TV agrees with me." So, what you're doing is what I would consider what should have been the normal baseline way human beings deal with their environment and each other. I mean, I think it's absolutely fabulous. And I think that everyone should be engaged in that kind of level, and that they should be taking it as a positive, humorous, thing in their lives. Just that this culture teaches people to be afraid of everything.
Sure
but
does.
This is something that is incredibly normal. I mean, Ryan found that, chickens and dogs do this. If you're a living organism, you're affecting your environment.
So are we born with this ability?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Every living thing does this.
Is there some mechanism within the brain that is just a natural thing for us?
Yes, absolutely. Our brains operate on filling out patterns and discerning patterns in the world. Like, for instance, the right half of the brain is looking for differences. Things in the patterns don't match. The left brain looks for things that do match. The left is going, yeah, that's the same, that's the same. Oh, that matches, that looks like this. The other side of the brain is going, no, that doesn't fit, that's different. We are pattern matchers. That's what we do. The synchronicity part, there is a complex metaphysical explanation. That's in the book. The book is a manual on using this superpower, but it's an explanatory fiction. Now, it would be easy for me, being steeped in the subject for so many years, to come out and say, well, here is the truth. Here is actually the way everything works. But I don't do that, because I like scientific things. So I go, this is what we know. This is what the brain does in the pattern matching. This is how perception works. This is what we're evolved to do. This is the likeliest explanation based on the science we have right now. I think people should live their lives exactly like the caller is describing. They should understand that, what you look for shows up. If your attitude is benevolent, what shows up is often helpful, possibly life-saving or life-transforming. You know, I have met, because I work in a prison system, I've met lots of guys who are, although I don't believe in the term evil, they're really dark people,
Yes.
and they have lots of synchronicity that is not benevolent.
Al, that's a good point. Because
so there's no, good or bad to it, but I think healthy, advanced, adjusted human beings should be walking through their environment, seeing the meaningful events around them, and then not, judging them as true or false, but just sort of taking them into the mix.
Kirby, the clock has got us the name of the book, How Synchronicity Works. It's available, folks, all over the place, Amazon.com, you name it, he's got it. Thank you, Kirby. Appreciate it. Synchronicity. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Boros, and George Knapp, I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.